5 years ago, director Barry Jenkins was accepting his first Academy Award for co writing the screenplay for Moonlight, which also won Best Picture and was perhaps the best film of the last decade. After the success of his third full length feature, If Beale Street Could Talk, an adaptation of the James Baldwin novel, Jenkins is back this year with an interpretation of The Underground Railroad, the Colson Whitehead novel about an enslaved woman's escape from bondage. I'm Jamil Smith, senior writer for Rolling Stone. For the Rolling Stone interview, I spoke to Jenkins about The Underground Railroad, his path to directing, and depicting Blackness in his film. How have you been these days as the release date draws near?
I'm pretty good. All things considered. It's a strange time to say pretty good, man. It's just been like a mad year. But it's nice. I've been working on this thing since 2016, so it's been a long time coming. So I don't know. It's weird because nobody's seen the show yet, and I'm anticipating what that's going to be like. A lot of anxiety, but also extreme relief because it's done.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I've seen it, and it's it's phenomenal. I really enjoyed it. I found a lot of it very moving and powerful. But beyond this being such a brilliant novel, why did the Underground Railroad appeal to you as a project to bring to film?
I'd always wanted to make something that dealt with this time period that sort of told the story of my ancestors and took the task, the institution of American slavery, but wasn't sure what would be the right vessel for me to take on those themes. When I read Colson's book for the first time, I remembered being a kid in grade school and hearing the words Underground Railroad and imagining Black folks on trains underground, which was a really amazing feeling. And then you learn the truth, and it's still amazing and astounding, but it wasn't that magical sort of feeling. It was like there's Batman, there's Superman, and then it was like the Underground Railroad. And so when I read Colson's novel, it kind of took me back to that feeling, and I thought, okay, this is the place. This is where I can channel this energy.
For those who don't know the story or haven't read Colson's novel, how would you encapsulate it?
The Underground Railroad is the story of an enslaved woman named Cora in her journey to both escape the condition of American slavery, but also reconcile with her legacy. For me, the book itself, Colson takes so much of American history and weaves it through the personification of an actualized Underground Railroad. But in doing so, he's able to, while speaking forthrightly to a very particular moment in our nation's history, sort of speak to all of it in this really beautiful and fluid way.
The limited series is 10 episodes, and I'm just curious to know what would you have had to compromise in this story in order to make it, say, a 2 hour film?
I think so much. I think, it's a series that's composed of some very forthright images, what I call hard images. And I think some equally forthright, but much more nuanced, much more delicate, soft images. And I think the truth of both the hard and the soft images can coexist. I think when you compress this journey into 2 hours, you kind of have to strike this balance and you end up with I think less hard images and less soft images. And so for me, telling the story over 10 hours would allow us to cover just the sweep and the breadth of what this experience may have been like, because having done the research, it is impossible to truly contextualize and understand what this experience may have been like. But I felt like by spreading the story over 10 episodes, 10 chapters, 10 hours, that it would give us just a much more larger canvas to sort of paint. And to me, that canvas is what must it have felt like to have been these folks. Because what my thesis from the very beginning was, there is no way you and I can have this conversation right now in 2021 if there wasn't some form of light, if through all the brutality and degradation, these people managed to preserve these moments of joy, these moments of ecstasy, these moments of beauty. And I felt like in order to truthfully convey the weight of those things, the soft images, we also had to portray the hard images.
As you mentioned, there's a lot of stark and sometimes horrifying realism in this series. And there's one scene in the first episode that's going to follow me to the grave. And I'm sure you know
Hmm.
what I'm talking about.
Hmm.
You have to also depict a number of these surrealist elements, like you mentioned, the railroad from the
Mhm.
novel. How did you find a balance between the realism and the surrealism?
A part of that is due to Colson Whitehead, the great Colson Whitehead. I felt like if we started in a place where you understood the foundations of the story, which are very much rooted in the reality of the time and the condition of the institution of American slavery, that then as you go on the journey, you will really understand A, what's at stake, but two, when the promised land is reached, just how beautiful, how bountiful that must have felt. I talk about being a kid and hearing the words Underground Railroad and the difficulty of contextualizing what these folks must have felt like. It is damn near impossible to truly understand what these folks must have felt like. It's why when Kanye said slavery was a choice, I was like, what the hell are you talking about? You have no idea. You couldn't possibly have any idea. But when I was a kid, I heard these words and I thought, so here it is, when this woman walks into this station for the first time, what is that gonna feel like? How amazing if I felt this way as a kid. Can you imagine being an enslaved person and walking into the station? You would get down on your knees and you would smack the ground. You would touch the metal to make sure it's real. And so I think in building the show, it was just about always chasing how close can I get to these people? How accurately can I portray both their external feelings and their internal feelings? We talk about Afrofuturism, and I think when you talk about personifying an Underground Railroad, that's sort of Afrofuturist, but we always think that's a thing on the horizon and not a thing from our past. And something about what Colson did in literalizing the Underground Railroad, it made me realize, oh, if your personhood is so restricted, by this condition, then mentally, oh my God, you must be going to so many different places. And it's when I realized that there had to be this thread, this undercurrent of the show where we could actualize Cora's feelings. We could actualize these visions, these hopes that she's running towards. And that's when the whole thing just opened up. That's when making a 10 episode show versus a 2 hour feature, that's when it just, I mean, the possibilities were limitless. And so the actors would do things, and I would be like, oh, that was kind of dope. I didn't think of that. I couldn't, with my conscious, think of that. I think when an actor is performing, it's almost like the subconscious is being embodied in the performance. And I thought, oh, let me chase that thing. And so if you've seen the whole show, the diversion in the first Indiana episode where Cora goes off to, I call it like the Alice in Wonderland episode, that just happened, Ron. It's not in the book. It kind of
Yeah.
just happened. And it was, we were filming the South Carolina episode and, making a show. Everything's a clock. Aaron Pierre was on a clock. I'm going to lose this actor. What would this woman's subconscious, how would she manifest him? And that's how the thing with the turntable came about. Wrote it like 2 days before we shot it. and I think in that way, my subconscious was being unlocked and making the show because there was just so much freedom and so much ground to cover. But that opened all these possibilities.
Indeed, that was wild. Um, this is not your first experience directing for television, of course. I know
Mhm.
you did episodes for Dear White People. What was the experience of doing television like, though, on this scale?
It was interesting. We shot for 116 days, and before this, the longest shoot for me was a Bill Street Could Talk, which was like 35 days. So I'm way, way out of my depth. My three features were 15 days, 25 days, 35 days. And in this case, 116 days, but also about 500 pages of content. It was daunting. And yet, when you do, and I hate to keep saying this because I sound like a broken record. And the more I say it, the more I have to ask myself, is that trite? But the experience of making this can't even compare to one day in the life of these characters. And so, as hard as it was, as difficult as it was, I just knew I just had to keep going. And then also, too, episode 1 and episode 10 take place in the same sort of world, in Georgia. And as we were scouting about, we're looking for pre-existing spaces that we can repurpose as sets. And then we realized this history has been erased. If there are these plantation houses people are getting married at, the quarters and the fields and all those things, those have been sanitized, if not removed. And so our production designer, Mark Freeberg, between he, myself, and James, we decided we were going to find a plot of land and we were just going to build it and just build it to scale. All the sugarcane you see in the first episode, cotton, the shacks, everything. We built it all from the ground up. And we decided too that when we were done, we were going to leave it. We were going to leave it because part of the difficulty of telling these stories in a very forthright way is it's very hard to marshal the resources. So you talk about having this large budget to tell a story of this scale. I feel like we're sort of planting the seeds for more stories on the subject to be told. And with these sets being amortized now, maybe the scale, the scope of them won't be as prohibitive. So it was kind of cool. There was a responsibility to kind of do right and to get it right and make it dope, but also to make it in such a way that it's not just me. There's going to be so much left behind for other folks to come behind us and make as well.
Wow. That's something, man. I know the COVID-19 pandemic affected your production. How much did it affect it?
It affected it greatly, man. We were scheduled to film for 115 days. We got to day 112, and just the reality just set in that it was getting ethically irresponsible to continue filming and that we needed to get folks home and get folks safe. And so we stopped, man. But because of the way we were shooting, those 3 days we needed, we're going to complete three different episodes. And so, I mean, man, to have started something in 2016, before Moonlight even premiered, I had already read this book and engaged with Coulson to then get 3 days shy of finishing, but those 3 days complete three different episodes. And I mean, completed them because, I think we were going to do like 7 pages on each of those days. That's a good chunk of an episode. It was heartbreaking. And also too, this was a difficult show to make. It just was, man. I mean, it was difficult emotionally. It was difficult from a logistics standpoint. And yet we got to day 112 and realized we had done it. And I love my crews, and I really love the crew that made this show. And to not be able to like legitimately, like even on the last day, just, dap people up, give some hugs, to not be able to do that because we walked off not knowing we weren't going to come back for day 113. We walked off on a Friday and we're not allowed to come back on that Monday. Just not having that sense of completion. It was brutal, but we had to get folks safe. I will say we then went and started editing the show, putting it together, and so much happened. I mean, we finished, I think our last day was like March 12th. A lot of stuff happened, literally on, I want to say March 11th or March 12th. A lot of stuff happened in this country, and then a lot of stuff continued to happen. And I thought, man, if I could go back and rewrite the show, I bet it could speak to so much of what's happening right now. But as we started to edit it, I realized, oh no, it already is. And it just kind of like fortified us to keep going. And when we came back for those last 4 days, because with COVID, we had to work a little bit slower. I don't know, the work just had a different meaning. And the actors brought it because they also understood the work had a different meaning.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, the resonance was there. And I remember one part in the second episode when they're talking about how, all of these traumas still live in our bodies.
Hmm.
And I said, man, if that doesn't, touch upon what we went through last summer,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what does.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is that was one of the things that I think Colson did so well by taking the Underground Railroad and giving it an almost fantastical sort of approach. It allowed him to speak to so much of American history because the housing now is porous and he can bring in so many different things. The Tuskegee experiment, the sterilization of our women, just so many things, the Oregon Exclusionary Acts. You just bring in all these things in here. Tulsa, in a certain way, just bringing all these things in. And it feels very of a piece because he's freed himself from the restrictions of American history, which I think is dope. Because we got a Black author who I'm sure grew up in the same schools I did, where American history was restricted from him. And now he's like, well, I'm going to repossess it. I'm going to take it over and tell it my way.
Indeed. Indeed. What kind of involvement did Colson have with the production?
Colson was chill, man. He was chill. We talked quite a bit before we started. He was off writing another book that would win the Pulitzer, Nickel Boys, while we were developing and making the show. But I would ping him. I would check in with him because there were some changes that we realized in the writers' room we were going to make to the book, and I wanted to make sure he was cool with them, and he was cool with all but one of them. And so there's one change I pitched that we didn't go through with, but all the others, man, he gave us his blessing.
Barry, I've seen all of your features several times, and even one of your prior episodes of television. And I regard this limited series as perhaps maybe the boldest and the most ambitious thing that you've done. Do you agree? And if so, that was that your intention?
I would agree with that, and I'd say it was my intention, but not directly. I guess indirectly, it was my intention. This show scared the shit out of me. It still scares the shit out of me. I mean, it terrifies me, and it terrified me from the very beginning. I think because of that, it kind of, especially as someone who's had a certain amount of success, it's really easy to get complacent. And I was looking for a very big apple to take a bite out of, one that kind of dwarfed anything I'd taken a bite out of previously. And I found that in this show. And I think, I was saying in an earlier interview, in fear we shrink and in love we expand. And I think I had to be terrified of this thing in order to realize I just got to pour so much love into it to really open myself. And I mean, it's your opinion, not mine. I can't have an opinion of my own shit, but I feel the same way. Certainly the most ambitious. And I think too, there were there are images in here that I don't think I was capable of creating. I don't think we were capable of creating, until this moment. And the process of making this thing, I don't know, we all just grew. So yeah, I appreciate the statement, bro. I think I feel the same way.
You wrote in the production notes for this show about Toni Morrison's Nobel lecture,
Hmm.
in which she told the fable about a blind woman who, in this cruel children's game, was asked to judge whether a bird they held was alive or dead. And she says, quote, I don't know whether the bird you were holding is dead or alive, but what I do know is that it is in your hands. It is in your hands. Why was that fable so meaningful to you as a director?
As I sort of continue in my art and my career and whichever word you want to ascribe to it, I'm always trying to find places to look into, to show me one, I don't know, almost like to shine a light on the path I think I'm on. um but also just brutally to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. And Ms. Morrison is one of the smartest human beings who's ever lived. And both her and some lectures by Kerry James Marshall were places that I turned where when I thought somehow I'm not sure I'm ready for this language. And in the case of Mr. Marshall, I'm not sure I'm ready to wield these images. I don't know that I have enough of a command in my voice. I don't know that I have enough of command of the images. And I look to the two of them, to, I don't know, maybe just shine a light on the path I was walking. And for whatever reason, this fable, especially with these images in particular, because they're so taboo. Again, because for the last 4 years, and especially for the duration of the creation of this project, the main slogan, especially filming this thing in the state of Georgia, you see all these red hats saying "Make America Great Again." That's language. And to me, what that language points to is a blind spot in the language that has led to this moment, which is I don't know that we truly have been forced or made to grapple with the legacy of this country, with the history of the institution of American slavery. And part of that's because the language hasn't been ours. When I went into my public school, I don't think those textbooks were written by people who look like me. I don't think they were written to educate people who look like me, to tell the truth about people who look like me, I should say. And I don't know why, but I stumbled. I did something told me you got to go listen to Miss Morrison's Nobel lecture. And when I read it, not that it gave me confidence, but at the very least, in the conundrum that she sort of plays out, and man, there are some hellified quotes in that address. I think it's one of the greatest essays anyone's ever written. It should be up there with Socrates and all that shit. I mean, it's a classic. I don't know. I think you went to Harvard or something, man. They got that classics course. I think this Morrison's Noble lecture should be up there with the
No,
classics.
no, I went to Penn, but yeah, I guess close enough.
But it gave me the confidence, one, that the language could be mine,
Mm,
that I could feel assured and taking the language and using it for my own, as a tool for my voice and to speak truth to my ancestors. And I mean, man, just such a, I think there's, Mr. Marshall always says art is a discursive art form. What you make is talking to this thing, is talking to that thing. None of these things exist in a vacuum. I think even across mediums, that's the case. And just
mhm.
something about her lecture, I don't know, it just spoke to me. It felt like it was the thing I needed to help me really accept that I was worthy of telling the story.
We're both in doing mediums and in businesses that pay us to learn,
Mhm.
and we're perpetual learners. And
Mm.
I want to know, like, what do you learn from storytelling? What do you learn? What are you learning thus far in your career? What do you hope to learn?
One of the things that I feel like, especially in this show, there's so many different episodes. I'm often talking about the audience, like who is the audience, and I think that especially with my last two films, my first film hardly anybody saw. The last two films, people saw them things, and they would tell me what they felt and tell me what they thought. And I think in a certain way, one of the things that I think I'm getting more secure and more receiving of the lessons is just respecting the audience, yeah, and really understanding um, what the audience is there for, why they're showing up to receive the work. And I think that helps me have more confidence that there's this thing that can happen as a storyteller. I'm sure you feel it as a writer, where you go, does this person trust me to tell this story? And I think I'm arriving at the point now where I do think people trust me to tell these stories. And so it takes a little bit of doubt and kind of sets it to the side. It's still there, but it's not in the driver's seat. And I think that's been really important. I think the other thing too is, I think nuance in language, I think is very, very important. We were talking earlier about hard and soft images. And I think that there's an image in this show, one of my favorites, where an enslaved man sits on a porch and he's sewing a doll for the children he did not conceive, but whom he wants to make his. And there's a way to editorialize that image that I think can speak directly to what I intended to say to the audience. But then I think as I grow in my work, there's this respectful relationship between myself and the audience where I can just present that image and the truth of it, the very fact of it, because those things happened. There were men who cared for children that they did not conceive and they loved them with their whole being. I think that image is strong enough that it can say that without me editorializing it.